Hey, welcome back to the Personality Hacker Podcast. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
One of the things we like to do here at Personality Hacker is talk about things that are personal growth related that may not be always obvious for you in your life. So as we're into personality types, we talk about the Myers-Briggs system, Enneagram, other personality type systems, but we also talk about other things outside of personality types that you can apply to your life that we think will be beneficial. And one of the things that I have been really turned on to in the last couple of years, I don't really know much about it, and that's what today's about, this conversation today is about, but one of the things that I've been really turned on to is blockchain and Bitcoin. You probably have heard a little bit about it in the wild out there. You know, if you're watching CNN or one of the news channels, you're seeing people talk about this. Maybe you've gotten into it. You know, a lot of our listeners are pretty intellectually bent, and they tend to be early adopters. So maybe you as a listener have experimented with this. You might even know more than I do personally. But maybe you're one of those people that you've heard this, you kind of know there's something here, and you want to know more. Last year, I attended an event in Las Vegas, the World Cryptocon event, and in that room, when I was watching people give talks, I was going to different exhibit booths, I had a few friends there with me explaining how Bitcoin and blockchain and all these things work. I had this impression, this vision, this experience that felt very similar to being around the early podcasting days, like back in the mid-2000s, because I remember it was a very geeky thing. It's kind of a geeky conference we were at. And I went, this is the future. Something here is going to be big. I don't know exactly what, but I caught a vision for it. I caught a passion for it, and I'm very interested in it. So today we invited actually a friend of ours, Sir John Hargrave, onto the podcast. He's written a book called Blockchain for Everyone. Sir John Hargrave, welcome to Personality Hacker.
Welcome back.
Yeah, you've been here before.
Joel and Antonia, it's such a pleasure to be back. We have fun, don't we?
You are one of the characters of the world that I love. It's just like you're kind of I would say a goofy guy, but I love it. Like it's a good goofy.
It's a goofy that Joel deeply resonates with.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much, and likewise.
Yeah.
Cool.
So before we get into the nitty-gritty of what blockchain is and what Bitcoin is, and by the way, I love that you wrote a book on it, because I didn't know that you were an expert in this.
Yeah, well, my story starts in 2013, and I invested in this thing called Bitcoin that Joel just mentioned. And Bitcoin is, it was originally meant as a digital currency, a digital money, basically a way of sending money as easily as we send email. And but it ended up behaving more like an investment, more like a stock. So a single Bitcoin, when I bought it back in 2013, was about $125. So for $125, you send your money to one of these places, which at the time were very sketchy and sort of hard to locate. I sent a bunch of money to this place in Belarus. I don't even know where Belarus is on a map. But I wired all this money there to buy all this Bitcoin. It was $125. Well, in 2017, that same Bitcoin had increased to $20,000. So it had shot upward, this investment, from $125 per Bitcoin all the way up to $20,000. So think about like buying a stock, for example, and imagine a stock that you buy at $125 a few years later is worth $20,000. You would say, that's the greatest investment of my life. I will never do something as great as that again. So that kind of reflects this mad excitement that was going on that Joel referred to in this space. And so I took this company, I had a marketing and media company called Media Shower, and I decided to completely pivot the company and go all in on this new technology called blockchain. And as soon as we did that, the first year was amazing. We're making money like crazy. And then the market dropped out and I lost everything, and then gained it all back. And this story is really the journey, which is kind of a spiritual quest of going through those high highs and those low lows and everything that I learned from that experience.
So the book it's a personal story too. It's not just like, here's how to invest in blockchain or Bitcoin. It's deeply personal, filled with personal stories about your experience in these highs and lows.
Absolutely. I'll tell you the story of writing the book. So I work with an editor at Simon & Schuster. His name is Jeremy Ruby Strauss. And this guy's brilliant. I've worked with him on a couple books. And he's had all these New York Times bestsellers, and I really trust his opinion. So I wrote the first manuscript of this book, and the idea was I want to make this technology accessible to everybody, right? Like I want to explain this in a way that's user friendly. So I wrote it as a series of essays or lessons, blockchain for everyone. And I send this manuscript to my editor, Jeremy, and Jeremy comes back and he says, well, John, this is how he talks. He goes, John, you had 4 parts to the book, and the first part is pretty good. Second part needs some work. Third part it needs to be rewritten. And the fourth part I'd get rid of altogether. And I gritted my teeth and I said, thank you very much for your honesty, you dick. I didn't say that because I respect him completely. But I went back and I reread the book, the manuscript. I said, he's right, because I tried to, again, sort of explain it as these theoretical, technical kind of, even though it's user friendly, it didn't have a story. And so I went back and rewrote the book. I wrote it 2 times. And the second time I wrote it as a very personal story to talk about everything that I went through. And I sent it back to Jeremy, and he came back and he goes, the next day, he calls me up and he goes, we got a page turner. And he says, I read the whole thing in one sitting, 9 hours. I never do that. And that's what we've heard from people who've read the book is like, wow, by wrapping it in a story, you've really made this accessible, kind of like a hero's journey, like a Lord of the Rings or like a Star Wars type personal myth, although it's based in reality.
So I'm assuming this huge gains, lose everything, gain back. That's the hero's journey. That's the narrative. So can you give us a little bit of a taste of what that story was for you and how it ended up being what you called a spiritual quest?
Yeah. So first of all, it stretched me in all these ways and brought out all these skills and talents that I never knew I had. So for example, this technology kind of sits at the intersection of technology and finance. And it's kind of a new discipline. And I'm a comedy writer. That's how I got my start. I'm a comedy writer. But as a writer and a thought leader and an entrepreneur in this space, I started getting invited to speak at all these conferences around the world. And there's a chapter where I'm speaking in Switzerland. I'm in Zurich, and I'm speaking to a conference of Swiss bankers. I'm a comedy writer. Let's get this straight. Talking to a conference of Swiss bankers, and they looked so good. Everybody in Switzerland looks like they just stepped out of a fashion catalog. They're just so smart and well-dressed. And I'm a comedy writer. And it's very difficult to explain like how much you have to grow and in order to feel like you're going to be able to do this well. And so as I'm talking about what I'm telling them, I'm explaining blockchain to you as I explained it to them, but I'm also telling you what's going on behind the scenes and how secretly I'm sweating and secretly like this is really terrifying and how I'm kind of trying to emotionally, mentally, spiritually rise to the challenge that I've been put in.
Yeah, because that's like a moment where you're like, oh, these are actually the power mongers of the world.
You feel like you're talking to the Illuminati.
Right.
Yes. And you're like, who am I? I grew up in Ohio, and I'm now here in Zurich talking to these extremely wealthy and powerful people and also trying to teach them something. Who am I to do that? And so at a certain level, you have to, I talk in the book, ALYB, which stands for act like you belong.
Yeah.
So you act like you belong. And what you do is you just show up and you pretend like you were meant to be there. You pretend like you are the expert. And doing that over time, this is something we talked about in my previous book, Mind Hacking. But over time, you actually do belong there because you have faked it till you make it.
Yeah. It gets real existential there for a minute. But then you're like, yeah, like what exactly does it mean to belong, right? You start asking all these spiritual questions. And then that concept of fake it till you make it ends up, like you said, until you actually do belong. And then that's where the component of personal reinvention comes into it.
Yeah, I mean, the book at its heart is a book about reinventing yourself. And I'm a big believer that life moves so fast, the world moves so fast, the pace of technology change is so fast that we have to constantly reinvent ourselves. So today, very few of us have one lifelong career, right? We have many careers. We have many careers, MINI, with many, many careers. And because of that, we have to constantly be learning, lifelong learners, I call it. So we're adding to our skill stack. And this book is a book about, there's this new technology, and I get so intellectually fascinated with it through this experience I've had with buying Bitcoin that I learn everything I can. And then I try to bring it back to people in a way that's user friendly, in a way that's accessible, in a way that everybody can understand. And that process of doing that starts to change me on every level. So, not just my career, not just my business, but they say the inner reflects the outer, or the outer reflects the inner. So, like, what's happening outside in my life is reflecting what's happening inside, in like my spirit, if you will, or on a personal or inner level. And so those two tracks are going on throughout the book simultaneously.
That's interesting because that's something that's very important to us at Personality Hacker, which is taking concepts that might be a little complicated or a little inaccessible for people and breaking them down to the most accessible level. And I would say the same thing. I would say that was very much it was like a change for us as well. Having to understand something to the point of explaining it in the most simple way possible means you have to understand the foundational element of it. You have to understand why it's powerful and why you're even doing it in the first place.
Well, and without oversimplifying it, which is also key, right? Right, John?
Yeah, it's you don't really understand something until you teach it to someone else, right? That's the famous line. And my other line I like to use is, it's really hard to simplify. It's really difficult to simplify, ironically, because you have to leave stuff out. But as you said, Joel, you don't want to leave the essence out. You want to include, keep what is truly important about that thing, but you don't want to dive down all of these rabbit holes of like details and things that might be interesting to you, but not to the casual listener or the casual reader. And in blockchain, that's a real challenge because it is very technically complex. And as I said, it kind of sits at the intersection, the Venn diagram of finance and of technology and economics. It's kind of a new discipline we call techonomics. And most people aren't that interested in economics, and most people aren't that interested in technology. Yet, tons of people are really interested in this idea of Bitcoin and cryptocurrency. And especially when they buy a little bit, once they invest in it themselves, we have a saying, which is that's the gateway drug. That's like you fall down the rabbit hole of how interesting this stuff is once you buy a little bit, because suddenly you have some skin in the game. You have a real investment in this stuff, and you start thinking these very philosophical questions like, why does money have value? Why do we trust the US dollar? And all of those answers that economists give suddenly don't seem to really hold much weight when you're looking at something like Bitcoin, which is very different from the US dollar. It's fascinating.
So let's dive into the fascinating element of blockchain and its child, Bitcoin. So can you first explain what blockchain is, and then how Bitcoin is different but related to it?
Yes, very simply, it's the internet of money. Blockchain is the internet of money. So let's think about our current internet as the internet of information. And we live in an information age. I think it's the most exciting time to be alive in the course of human history, because we live in this time where all of our information essentially has been put online. You used to have to go to a library to look up a fact, and now everything is freely available in a device that's in your pocket. That's crazy. That blows my mind. So that's this exciting revolution that we're part of, the information revolution. The next phase of that will be the internet of money. And the idea is just as like we used to send paper letters and then, that gave way to email. We used to use paper maps and that gave way to like Google Maps. We used to use paper money and gradually that's going away. That's already gone away to a large degree, right? Like, we're all paid by direct deposit. Most of us, we get it in a bank account. We use a credit card or debit card or Venmo to send money around. We actually never see paper money anymore. We see numbers. They're just numbers. And again, why do those numbers have value? They have value because we all agree they have value, but we're all just basically working full-time jobs. We're hustling all the time for numbers and we're paying each other with numbers. Well, what we're doing is making those numbers even easier to send because right now it's very cumbersome, time consuming to send money. If you want to send it overseas, for example, international wire transfers, they're very time consuming, expensive. It's very hard. A third of the world is unbanked, meaning they don't have access to traditional banking systems. And because of that, our current money system actually doesn't work that well. We've got all these different currencies between competing nation states, competing tribes. And the internet of money is something that's going to make that flow of money and value as easy as the internet of information has made the flow of information. You guys are doing your podcast on top of the existing internet, right? And on top of this internet of information in the future, you're going to be able to get paid for it on top of this new internet of money. That's blockchain. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. When I think about money, I think in terms of fiat money, right? So governments around the world have, however they do it, they basically issue money and kind of say, hey, we're good for this in a lot of ways. Like here in the United States, the government doesn't do it, it's the Federal Reserve. And the banking system, it's very complex how it happens. They issue they issue currency, but it's basically backed by a shared reality, a consensus reality we all have that this is valuable.
Yeah. Yes.
And that's kind of how currency works and money works all over the world.
Yeah.
And we used to be on gold standards where a dollar issued was worth $1 of gold in the bank. And what's interesting about blockchain and the money that can be built off blockchain, from what I can understand, as much as I understand it, is there is in some ways a route back to having our currency and our value backed by a realness. Now, the realness is in the energy burned to create it, right? It's kind of like it's almost like you're mining and prospecting real digital gold in a way, or digital asset. And it's hard to get your head around because it feels like things on the internet or out there, like blockchain, are ethereal. They're not real. They're not tangible. But in some ways, digital currency is more tangible, like realistically tangible, than fiat money issued by governments. Am I understanding this correctly?
You are hitting on something very important. I'm impressed with that insight because there's a chapter in the book where I'm in the basement of the Federal Reserve. So here's how this happened. I got invited to a conference at the Federal Reserve in Boston about cryptocurrencies. And after the conference, I was eating in the lunchroom of the Federal Reserve. So this enormous bank, I'm literally surrounded. These stone walls all around me. Behind them are millions of dollars worth of cash that they keep on hand at the Federal Reserve, this giant bank. I'm eating in the commissary, and where sadly a bowl of soup costs $3 trillion. And I'm having a video conference with a prospective client. As I said, we run this marketing and media company called Media Shower, focused on blockchain. And we have this blockchain client, prospective client, who is launching a new stable coin, which is a coin that aims to unseat the US dollar. So it's a cryptocurrency that aims to replace the US dollar. Now, if you want to understand the meaning of the word irony, picture being in the basement of the Federal Reserve doing a deal that is going to unseat the Federal Reserve. That's where I was. But what was interesting about this project was it was backed by real gold. So as you just said, the US dollar used to be backed by gold. That meant if you had a dollar, you could go in and redeem it theoretically for a dollar's worth of gold somewhere. And as many people know, Nixon took us off the gold standard in the 70s, which basically meant that we did not have a gold standard anymore. The US dollar was worth whatever we said it was worth, and it was just sort of free floating. So it's basically, as you said, a shared illusion. It's a collective lie. It's a fiction. But because we all choose to believe it, that this US dollar has value, it does have value. It works. So here we were in the basement of the Federal Reserve working on a new cryptocurrency that was actually backed by actual gold. So think about that for a second now, that we're going back to the gold standard in many ways to back up these digital or virtual assets, these new types of digital money with actual gold and quote unquote real value, where the US dollar has none.
So how I see it is I go to work during the day. Let's say I get a job, a 9-to-5 job, and I work an hour. And let's say during that hour, I make $30 in that hour.
You're worth at least $100.
Okay,
Come on.
$100 in that hour, whatever that number is. Basically, what is happening is the effort that I produce in that hour, or at least the perception of the effort I produce in that hour, because if I'm at work, I'm probably screwing around half the hours of the day. But let's just assume I'm producing every hour. I'm generating effort from myself. Yep. The energy that I generate then gets translated by my company I work for into this shared reality of dollars. And then they transfer, they capture the energy I generated during that hour into these little green slips of paper that say that energy you generated that hour is now captured in the form of $30 to $100, whatever the payment is, $100, let's say. And we're going to now hand that to you. We've captured that value that you've created for us, the energy. Now we're going to hand that to you. And that $100 is like a bundle of energy that was transferred from the efforts I put into something.
Well, and you feel pretty good about that because $100 an hour is a pretty good gig.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So I'd feel really good about that. So I understand, like, at least on a principle level, how, like, money to me, like the dollar, the US dollar, and if I'm bearing out my ignorance, if you're like an economist listening, just allow me to be embarrassing in front of you here. But like the dollar is capturing a sense of shared reality that's a value capture, like energy stored in the dollar. And I kind of see that. But with blockchain or Bitcoin or the digital currencies, what is it? What value is it capturing? Is there a physical, you just talked about Bitcoin having actual gold backing it, but there's also Bitcoin that doesn't have, or not Bitcoin, but digital currencies, cryptocurrencies that don't have necessarily an actual piece of gold backing them. Do they have something else backing them? It's energy stored somehow? Is that correct? Or energy generated? Don't we have to use energy to generate these in the first place? How does that work?
Well, yeah. So in the book, I talk about what gives money value, and money has value because two things. One is we trust it, and the second is we agree on it, and that's really it. Anything can be used as money. Prisoners use packets of ramen noodles as money. In World War II, they used cigarettes as money. There's an island that uses stones as money. All that matters is that we trust that money is going to have its value, and we agree on it. Trust and agreement. That's it. That's it. So other things like being able to pay your taxes with it, or the government backing it, those help for sure because that adds to the trust and agreement. You don't need that. So that's all we need. So at the end of the day, these so-called cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin, and these other alternatives to Bitcoin, which we call altcoins, they have value because we all agree they have value. If you have people who are willing to buy it for a certain price, people who are willing to sell it at the same price, then you have something of value. And that's what we mean by this internet of money, or this internet of value.
Let me be maybe more clear with my question. I've read that there are people who are called miners in the cryptocurrency space, and they're not buying crypto. They're doing some other energy activity. Like they didn't go to work and generate $100 for that hour and then take that $100 and transfer that to crypto. Their work is in generating crypto. How are they creating the value from their efforts to mine crypto? What is happening there? Why are we rewarding a miner who's doing some kind of computer calculation? What are we rewarding them with when they, quote unquote, earn or mine crypto out of the out of the ether?
Sure. So this is Internet of Money, like our Internet of Information, is run on a shared network of computers, right? So like we all understand theoretically that the internet, the existing internet, is based on these clusters of computers that are spread out all over the world. So same thing for blockchain. Blockchain is the Internet of Money, and you have all of these volunteers who are contributing computers or contributing computing power to keeping these networks going. So it's not run by a company. There's no there's no Bitcoin company. It's basically a bunch of independent Bitcoin enthusiasts or investors, and we call them miners. And they're basically helping this network exist. And in return for contributing their computing power and electricity, because it runs on a sizable amount of electricity, they are rewarded with little bits of Bitcoin. And in order to attract people in the first place, they had to give it a sexy name, so they called it mining. So it's kind of like mining gold in that you're out there working all the time, running your computer, and every once in a while you're rewarded with a little bit of Bitcoin. So they are contributing value. They're keeping the network going, and that is one way that you can basically earn certain types of these cryptocurrencies. The other way is simply by buying them from someone else who owns them, which you can do, like you buy stock, for example, on a digital exchange, and you can then hold it or invest it or even trade it. There's a whole new class of blockchain traders emerging who are doing this 24 hours a day, just like stock market traders.
Sure. Forgive me for continuing down this line of thought. I'm working towards something here, but I want to make sure I'm getting it right and I understand as I'm working toward this. So there are people who help keep the networks going, if you will, and they're taking a hard asset of energy, or like a real thing of energy, like it costs electricity to run a computer and run the calculations. So it's an actual, like you're taking oil out of the ground, you're taking solar out of the sky, and you're turning that basically into more digital currency and perpetuating what's already there. So you're contributing real energy into capturing that energy as an idea of cryptocurrency. Am I clear on that? Is that correct?
That's right. So in other words, there is something that you're contributing besides your computer, which is electricity, and that electricity has a real cost to it.
Correct.
And because you are spending money, that is part of the justification that some people use to say, well, that's why Bitcoin and altcoins have value. It's because people are spending real money to pay for real electricity and real computers to run this network.
Yes, and in your book you talk about this idea of solar, and I want to get to this because this is kind of where this is why I got it at the conference last year, is because there's real energy being transferred into cryptocurrency. Like there's real, you either have to pay for that energy. I have to go and pay my electric bill to hook it into my computer if I want to be a miner and contribute to this.
Yep.
Or if I could find a way to generate that energy at a very low or minimal cost, or maybe no cost, and it was renewable, I could in perpetuity continue to mine and create Bitcoin with these calculations. Am I also correct on that assumption?
Yes. So in other words, we could use solar energy to offset some of the electricity that is being spent to run these networks. And then that solar energy would have a new type of value that could potentially be used as sort of its own type of cryptocurrency.
Correct.
Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, and I think that what this speaks to me, kind of as I envision this in the future, cryptocurrency and blockchain, because blockchain it's almost a record-keeping technology from what I understand. I'd like to talk a little bit about that if we could, but let's just say the thing that's built off of blockchain of a cryptocurrency. One of the things that this could lead us to is it's an incentive. You know, what is it? Economics is basically the study of incentives, right? Mm-hmm. So there's an incentive if we're using more cryptocurrency to find cheaper and more cost-effective ways to generate our energy in our world, because it's rewarded economically, and that also then spills into environmentally and socially and all the other things. So what I love about this is at the baseline, at the core of it, I think, from what I can understand about it, there are some incentives for us to do things that are in our best interest as humans on the planet, just like with energy, for example, that are going to help us think more in renewable ways, because not only does it, quote unquote, help the environment, but it would also help us economically if we were all on this system. Am I understanding that correct? Or is that idea something that you can maybe play with here and help me unpack anymore?
Yeah, Joel, you're right in my passion zone with that question. So a few years ago, my wife and I invested in solar, and it's expensive to buy solar panels, and we agonized for a long time over the decision, but we finally did it. We took the plunge, got a big solar array on our house, and I've never looked back. It was one of the greatest decisions. Every day, Joel, when you wake up and the sun is shining in the sky, it's like a big, warm, sunny orgasm. It is incredible because you're like, I am minting money today. The sun is
Yeah.
literally like a paycheck every day. I'm making money. At the end of the month, if you make enough energy, you actually sell electricity back to the power company. You get a negative energy bill. It's the greatest. It's the greatest. Then we got an electric car. So now every day, the car, you just plug it in it's like a device. You just plug it in when you pull it in the garage. We got our home running on the sun. The car's running on the sun. It's the best. Now, imagine if we had a kind of cryptocurrency that could basically record how many kilowatt hours we're generating each day. So let's say, we'll call it solar coin. Every day, if we generate 3 kilowatt hours, I don't know how much a kilowatt hour is. I'm totally making this up. We generate 3 solar coin. Okay, and those solar coin now are like a virtual currency. They're like Starbucks reward points, basically. They're like a virtual currency, but we could buy and sell them with other people, like they would have real value. And that kind of energy marketplace is what we mean by this internet of money or internet of value. Is we could monetize anything. And that's what you're talking about now, is like there's all these incentives and sort of gamification elements we could add to this to turn anything into a kind of money, just like Starbucks does with its Starbucks reward points, but on a far grander scale and for far greater good of humanity. And that's what's exciting. Something like that, solar coin, could transform us onto solar power in one generation. And the entrepreneurs working on this, I interview them in the book, like they are real believers that we could do this in this generation. How inspiring is that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the kind of stuff, this whole let's regulate everybody to have to go green in the next 10, 15 years or something. Let's force everybody, let's regulate them. Well, we look at the iPhone that came out in 2007, like who's going to want an iPhone? Now like everybody carries around either an iPhone or some kind of a smartphone because it's just so superior to not have, to not having one. Well, I look at that kind of too here. It's like, well, if you really want people around the world to retrofit their houses and be more green and all this, you're not going to do it through legislation. You're probably going to do it through something that draws them toward it, something like a currency or something they can make money, or like you incentivize them. You don't regulate them into that. And I can see how technology like a cryptocurrency or a blockchain technology could help us with some of these social movements. That's one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on today. Is I think that fundamentally, this can be a tool for equality, for social change. This can be a tool for a lot of things that can help us moving forward in the world. Giving people access to currencies when they don't have a bank, maybe rural areas or even developing countries. There's a way for them to enter into a global marketplace now. And I think that's some of the exciting stuff that can come from this. Now, I think when somebody hears this, though, they're a little nervous because there's like, well, is this safe? Is this trackable? And from what I understand around the technology of blockchain, what it is it's basically it's a transparent public record of transactions. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's basically a way of keeping a network in sync, or keeping sort of a checkbook or a ledger of transactions in sync. But you really get it. And your idea of using this technology to harness for good, for great social change, is right on the money, literally. Because what we've learned is that people will go out of their way to earn money. And if you can sort of incentivize people with this idea that you're going to make money from this thing and create a new token or a new coin, again, that has real value behind it, just like we're talking about the solar coin, then you can incentivize people to make decisions that are good for humanity. And that is exactly what we're trying to do in the message that we're trying to carry out with this book.
So, for a person who has maybe heard the term cryptocurrency, I keep trying to separate it out from blockchain because those are two different things. Blockchain is a specific technology, and cryptocurrencies are birthed from the concept of blockchain. And so, go ahead.
I'm sorry. The way I explain it in the book is the blockchain is the platform.
Mm-hmm.
And then cryptocurrencies are the things that live on top of that platform. And just think about the internet. So the internet is the platform, and websites like Uber and Google and Airbnb and your podcast and all those things, those are applications that sit on top of the internet.
Right.
So Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies are applications, if you will, decentralized applications, they're called, that sit on top of this technology, this platform called blockchain.
Right. And so I think that's a good thing for a complete beginner to understand that there are two different, one is an application of the other the technology of the other. So
Yes.
Blockchain is the platform, and then cryptocurrencies come on top of it. Now, what I find, I mean, what's so interesting is that, number one, your personal story in all of this was massively transformational for you as an individual, just getting into this world. And then we just talked about the results of maybe people buying into all of this as incentives to not just transform individuals like your personal story, but also to have a disruptive but transformational impact on entire cultures, like maybe all of us globally with how we see our relationship to energy. And to be incentivized to have, a relationship with more renewable energies because then all of us can benefit from that. So I think the reason why we find the concept of blockchain and cryptocurrency so interesting is because it really is kind of the definition of disruptive, right? It just comes in and just shakes everything up, just like Joel was mentioning smartphones did. You didn't have to regulate all of us having smartphones. We just want smartphones because they're so much more superior and make our lives infinitely better. And things like blockchain, because blockchain can be used for other applications as well. I actually am more attracted to the concept of blockchain itself and all the ways that it as a platform can be disruptive in all sorts of different ways. But one of the more practical elements for us as individuals is this idea of Bitcoin, which is how we can engage with it as a currency. So I guess at this point, if I was somebody who was new and was listening to this and kind of trying to wrap my head around all of this stuff, because I remember being that person not that long ago, one of the first questions I had was, well, there's a lot of Bitcoins that seem, or it's not Bitcoin, Bitcoin is a specific cryptocurrency, but there's a lot of cryptocurrencies that seem to be sort of coming up, and then do they, like, are they all in competition with each other? Are all these different cryptocurrencies, like, are all of them valid? Bitcoin is one kind of cryptocurrency, but like, is that the one I should be looking at and investing in because it's the most solid? Or how does a person navigate through all of that?
Yeah, that's exactly the through line of the book. That is the overarching story, is trying to make sense of this new asset class and figure out which ones are worth putting your money into, which ones are worth investing in, which ones are worth buying, and which ones should you ignore. And by the end of the book, I do discover a process or a method for determining which ones are really worth our time. And simply stated, the best investing philosophy is keep most of your personal wealth in stocks and bonds, a very traditional portfolio, but carve out a small percentage of your overall investments, maybe between 2 and 10%, and put it into either just Bitcoin or maybe the top 2 or 3 cryptocurrencies, which might be Bitcoin, Ethereum, and Ripple. Think of that as your alternative investment. Think of it as your mad money. But we have a lot of research in the book that shows that that is the strategy that would have vastly outperformed the stock market over the last 3 years. And in the year since I finished the manuscript, it has still outperformed the stock market, even though Bitcoin has had a rough year. And that is the safest way of thinking about this. So it's important to come into this as a educated investor, but also to have a hunger for learning, again, lifelong learning, and adding to your skill stack and reinventing your own personal knowledge about money.
So all three of us are people in our midlife, right? We're just entering midlife. I think you're approximately our age, right? Around the
I'm 18.
Okay, all right, good. Us too. And so
Plus,
we're at
plus 32.
Right. Well, then we're pretty much all around the same age, around 40. I'll be 42 soon, but that's around 40. So
No, he said plus 32.
Oh, plus 32. Oh, right.
Yeah, you
a
can
little
call me
older.
40.
Sorry,
Good.
my math was
He'll
bad
love
there.
being called 40. It's great.
50.
He's like, yeah, I'm on board with that.
Okay, you're a little older than us. Anyway, but the point of all that with my terrible math there, the reason why I'm mentioning that is because we're at an age where things like investments and alternative form of investments and all of that stuff is very relevant to us because we get to this age and we're like, oh crap, when we get really old, I don't know if anybody's going to take care of me. That includes government, Social Security, my own kids might be douchebags.
Certainly not our kids.
Yeah, exactly. Like there's all sorts of things where we're like, okay, maybe I should start thinking this way. But we attract a pretty broad audience of a lot of different ages. And that includes younger people who, they're just trying to get their first gigs. They're just trying to get, some like a job where they can move out of their parents' house or just, just trying to figure out what their career is. Would you say that this is a good time for somebody who's younger to at least educate themselves on this, or should they just not even be thinking about it because they're just trying to establish their lives? And because I know that for younger crowds, the concepts of investments and stocks and that kind of stuff, it almost feels like, that's like highfalutin. It's like I'm just trying to get a gig where I can afford my, my apartment, my food bill. Is there something special about blockchain or cryptocurrency that might encourage somebody even in that position to maybe do some self-educating on it? Is this like something that we're starting to think might be a way of the future? So that even if you don't have any discretionary income to invest in something like Bitcoin, it's still a good thing to start educating yourself on because that like you might be able to find creative ways to invest in something like this, even at a young age without any discretionary income. And that will set you up for the future.
Yeah, absolutely. When my wife and I first got married, we went to a personal wealth seminar, which was run by like certified financial advisors. It was very good kind of training on how to think about investing. And one of the things they told us was like, put aside a small portion each month into some kind of investment. And just get in the habit of doing it. And even if it's $100 a month, even if it's $10 a month, get in the habit of doing that. And being young is a tremendous advantage because you have the advantage of time, and those investments will grow over time. But the most important thing is to get in the habit of doing it. And so in the book, we really create a template for you to follow by doing that steady drip investing, just that drip, drip, drip every month, putting a little bit aside, and how to allocate that. And then being really smart about this new blockchain asset class, which is growing like crazy. And that is something that financial advisors just don't understand yet. I've been so amazed at how few financial advisors really understand this stuff at this point. It's one of my missions is trying to educate them about it, but I think they're a little nervous to admit what they don't know about this space. So that's what I would say is like, even if you're young, and especially if you're young, try to put aside a little bit each month in some kind of plan like we're talking about in this book. And if you're older, even more so, you can see just really tremendous gains over the past few years if you had invested in this. And it's very much the personal investment philosophy that my wife and I follow today.
So I think that's great advice, by the way. I think that, everybody that's older wishes when they were younger that they put a little bit away every month, like saving up, So I think that's a great general principle, even if it's just saving stocks and also Bitcoin or, cryptocurrency of some sort.
I have to say, I'm not a financial advisor, so it's not advice, but it is sharing my personal experience with you. And It's also sharing with you the actual facts about historical returns on this stuff.
Yeah. So from my perspective, we call it cryptocurrency, but really it's not a currency yet, it's a commodity. Like if you think about it from a standpoint of like, we don't actually use gold and silver to buy and sell things anymore, but people invest in gold and silver. They buy and hold it as a commodity. And on the markets, that's kind of how a lot of people approach cryptocurrencies, is they buy and hold them, or they buy and sell them. They trade them like you would a general commodity in how I see it. But I think one of the things that will help cryptocurrency going forward is if it can be treated like a true currency. And there are places and pockets that it is. So my friend Nick talked about his company. He was going to begin accepting it. He has a digital product company very similar to Personality Hacker. And I'm really turned on by the idea of actually receiving cryptocurrencies as payment for some of our digital products and services. And I think that kind of thing, if you're listening right now and you have maybe a company that you have your overhead isn't high, there's an opportunity for you to potentially take for maybe some of your products and services. I think that could be a really interesting way to go too. As we experiment with this, the more people that use it for actual currency, trading value for goods and services, I think that's going to be also something that's another way to get into the game too, right? If we started taking crypto here at Personality Hacker, we're not buying crypto, we're trading value of products and services we've created for cryptocurrency. So that's another, I think, avenue for somebody maybe that's a business owner.
Absolutely. And we need that the flow of money in order to make these really take off. I'll tell you a story about a guy I knew who had a lot of Bitcoin in the early days. And there was a place in Cambridge, he worked at MIT, and at Cambridge that accepted Bitcoin. It was a pizza parlor, a restaurant that accepted. And he bought all this pizza with Bitcoin. Well, today those pizzas would be worth like $10,000 each. Because of the rise of Bitcoin. And so he sort of kicks himself like, why did I use that as a currency? That's the challenge with using Bitcoin, which again, does not have a stable price. It's constantly going up and down in value. But now what's happening is there are new cryptocurrencies. And I mentioned one before that was called a stable coin. This is the hottest thing today. Is a stable coin is kind of tied to a stable value. So like the US dollar, for example. So you might have a stable coin. One of them is called Tether. Another one is called USD coin. And those are always worth $1. So you know that if you accept a dollar's worth of USD coin, that tomorrow it's still going to be worth $1. And you hope in another year, 5 years, 10 years, you're still going to have $1. And there was a press release that recently came out that the Bermuda is now accepting USD coin to pay for taxes. So governments are slowly starting to come on board with these and really accept them like currency. And that's what's needed, again, that flow in order to make them true currencies.
So that's surprising to me. I would expect governments to not want their power and authorities threatened by, or any kind of financial systems that already exist. I would think they'd be looking a little bit sideways at this, going, wait a minute, this threatens everything we have power around.
Well, other governments are going to create their own. So China is rumored to have one that will be released in the near future. So they're going to have their own digital currency. And once that happens, I think it's going to be a race for every nation to have their own digital currency. So I think that will be the next wave, as we'll start seeing all the countries have their own digital version of their traditional non-digital or fiat currency. Meanwhile, we'll have all of these indies, all these independent currencies that are out there as well. It's a very interesting and exciting time to be alive.
Yeah, because again, my visionary nature goes, wow, if governments are issuing their own cryptocurrencies, this now alters the game of, we're no longer citizens of a country potentially. We might be owners or investors in a country. It kind of shifts the thinking in terms of your country now has an economic system kind of tethered into being a citizen of that country. I can already see down the road the geopolitical structures changing drastically if we can weave together citizenship with maybe coin ownership. I mean, I know that's super abstract and super woo-woo and super potentially long-term, but I think this is the rumblings of blockchain, of cryptocurrency. These are the things that I think, the solutions that we keep thinking are going to be the solutions for us in our modern times. it's probably going to be a massive disruptive technology if we as humans make it through things like global warming and all these geopolitical wars and all these factions and all these tribalisms. Like, it's probably going to be a technology that gives us an on-bridge to fixing these problems, because I don't think they're fixable in our current thinking or our current problem set.
I say all the time, this is the most exciting time to be alive. And I think this is the most exciting industry to be a part of, because we are literally changing the world economic systems. And that is, can you imagine any bigger project to be part of? It's just so exciting. It's
Absolutely.
so much fun.
Well, and in the early days, I remember when I first discovered or found out about blockchain and cryptocurrency, there was this sense that the governments were a little hostile. And the idea that China might be rolling out their own crypto, if it becomes competitive with, like you talked about, geopolitical factions, then it's not going anywhere. So regardless of whether or not you're a person right now that feels like, well, I'm not going to invest in that, I have no money to invest, or whether or not you're a person who's like trying to figure out your retirement plan, I think that at least having a familiarity with this entire world, I think is valuable for everyone. So your book's called Blockchain for Everyone, and it's a compelling personal narrative and story that also, by the time you get to the end of the book, you have a grasp on exactly what this technology looks like.
Yeah, that's right. And as my editor, Jeremy Ruby Strauss, said, it's a page turner.
That's right.
It is a good book. I've gotten about halfway through it, and it's got a lot of stories in it. And it's a very narrative-focused book that really leads you through the story of your journey in blockchain and understanding about this. So page by page, we're watching you kind of explore this world, and I come along with the journey as I'm reading, and I'm going, okay, this is cool, because I get to kind of almost go on that journey with you, and I learn bit by bit as you go through the book. So you can pick this up at major booksellers everywhere. It's called Blockchain for Everyone, Sir John Hargrave. And you've actually been on the show before. You can go back and listen to our other podcast interview where you wrote another book, Mind Hacking, which is also a fantastic book. So, Sir John, I love it. Is there anywhere else you'd like to send people to get more information about you or some of the stuff you talk about?
Well, blockchainforeveryone.com is where you can pick up the book. Cool. And thanks for mentioning my previous book, Mind Hacking, which, thanks in part to your podcast, has just passed the 100,000 copy mark.
Nice.
So we've sold a ridiculous amount of copies of that, most of them through the audiobook. And I think that podcast listeners like yours will really enjoy the audiobook version of both Mind Hacking as well as Blockchain for Everyone. The audiobook version we really made into kind of a radio play. It's got original music. It's got tons of like sound effects. I voice all the characters in the book, and it's just a ton of fun to listen to.
Oh, fantastic.
I love your creativity. I love it.
Me too.
It's awesome. All right. Thanks, Sir John Hargrave, for being here on Personality Hacker. And if you've been listening along and you want to find out more about Personality Hacker, or you want to leave a comment or ask a question or get a conversation started around some of the stuff that Sir John has been talking about today, we've been talking about around blockchain, about cryptocurrency. Maybe you have some insights that you've discovered in your journey of life. Maybe you have some questions, some comments. You'd like to share your story. You can do that over at personalityhacker.com directly below this show. Love to get the community involved in talking about some of these ideas that we've been unpacking today.
And if you enjoyed this podcast, you can subscribe to us on iTunes and various Android platforms. I'm not going to talk about our book because I'm not going to compete with John.
That's right.
He's got a cool book. He's got 2 cool books. Go check his books out at blockchainforeveryone.com.
My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
And we'll talk with you on the next Personality Hacker podcast.